effort.
Great. Maybe one last question. I want to we have some other slides to get to, and we'll open up for more questions after that. And I think people are pressing a little bit on the kind of the risk of the Charlestown, the Navy Yard here, vis-a-vis the rest of the Harbor Walk in the city. And I don't know if you're even able to kind of compare worst. And maybe if you live there and you're flooded, it's worst from your perspective. I don't know, but people are pressing a little bit for kind of the risk here versus other parts of the city. And that may be a hard question to answer.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I know that there's significant risk of if we go like to the mid-century and then out to 2070. I think the biggest part here is you'll see that the flood pathway is, if not stopped about 2050 or so, or mid-century, if we don't take some action now, this is where these flood pathways start to connect from the Navy Yard side and the flood pathway that's also coming from Little Mystic Channel. And so you, without cutting those off, you get a significant, more amount of flooding into the interior of the neighborhood here. And so that's why it's a big deal and something to address in this near term fashion.
And this is another factor. I mean, what you're seeing here is just sort of like a bird's eye view are the flood depths. And another thing that we're looking at is what are the elevations of the buildings that are at risk. Newer buildings tend to be at a higher elevation. Older ones are more vulnerable, and those are the things that we're looking at. Kate, do we have anything that touches on the flood depths? Just for comparison, with the rest of the city, we're looking at the flood paths, these areas shaded in blue, but more detail on what are the flood depths, and then what are the elevations of the buildings and the critical infrastructure. That's how we determine the risk. Is not just areas where water will be observed, but the structural the structures that are at risk in the critical infrastructure.
And Kate, if we don't have that tonight, that's something as we go forward, we'll want to see if we can,
Yeah, I know we have started to look into that. We may not have it quite ready tonight.
Yeah. So I think we'll note that that's a great question, and we'll try to gather that information up. So when we come back to you with further information, advancement of the design, we'll have some of that information you asked for tonight. Okay, let's go ahead and go through. We have a few more questions, some Slido, and then another time for questions here. So. Okay, back one slide there. Okay, so the next slide is we just want to show that we understand that this is a complicated site in terms of stakeholders and property owners, right? So I'm not going to list everybody here, but you all know better than we do in many ways that there's a lot of property owners, there's a lot of individual condo owners, there's residential associations, there's the feds, there's the states, there's NGOs. And we know there's a number of these kind of tenant associations and then kind of neighborhood associations and or condo associations. So we know there's a lot of people to engage and work with. And I think one of our goals is to try to do that as best we can as we move forward. So people kind of are coming along, having a chance to influence and weigh in on the designs and the work as it continues. So we want to also note that there are some other studies going on at the same time, and the intent is to be well coordinated with all of these. So you can see with our flood resilience project, we've done some preliminary work, but really, really in the beginning of this work, which will go for roughly a year until the winter of 2026. And at that point, again, we hope to have, sort of pretty clarity on some further design and how we might move forward to an actual project. Simultaneously, the National Park Service is doing a flood resilience study for its property just adjacent to this area. They intend to be done a little bit sooner. In the fall, but we'll see how that goes. And they're doing something kind of similar. And the idea is to coordinate because obviously, if these two designs and efforts aren't coordinated from a district perspective, they won't be successful. That's going to be important. As you may know, the Little Mystic Channel Park project is likely to be under construction very soon, and a lot of planning and effort by many of you to make that happen. And so we kind of note that and the fact that it's getting newly constructed as we think about this longer term design, those thoughts and ideas will be folded in and considered as this project moves forward too. And lastly, harbor wide, there is really the City of Boston Coastal Storm Risk Management Study with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. That's a longer term study kind of representing kind of the whole harbor. And again, the intent is to coordinate with the Army Corps as we move forward there. And the city is trying to work very closely with them to ensure that there's good alignment. Okay, so we have a few more Slido questions we want to ask. We want to have some discussion about those, and then we'll talk about next steps from tonight. So let's go to the next one. So again, join back on Slido. And these are very broad questions. We're going to get into more detail, and we'll describe in a bit how we're going to do that as we go forward. But in general tonight, again, you can choose to this time. And this idea here is like, what are the things that are important to you in terms of kind of design elements as we go forward? So want to kind of note these things here and pick two, just kind of see what people's preferences are by using Slido. So again, click on that on your phone or on a URL on your browser. And we want to just kind of get a sense of where people are at with this. And then once we've got the results, we'll show them. So. We'll give people a minute to take a look at this. Okay, we got 20 folks. If we can get a few more up there, that'd be great. And then we'll show the results here in just a second. Let's give everybody a chance to fill it out. All right, we're getting up there. Good. All right, why don't we show the results for tonight? Okay, so for folks who polled tonight, it looks like about 50% want to make sure that the design works really well with existing structures. It's, the waterfront there is a really lovely place. Many of you invest a lot of money in your property. That's your home. So I understand that it wants to work well with existing structures. Makes a lot of sense. Again, that's a very strong result. Next is improved walking paths, and we'll talk more about that as we go forward tonight and beyond about what that means to you all. Looks like more trees for shelter and shade, especially as things get hotter. And then accessible structures primarily means access for a variety of mobility, and also that you're able to get to things or things that you want to do, for instance. So both has to do with kind of American Disability Act compliance as well as general accessibility. People have talked about native plantings, recreational aspects. I think there's some aesthetic concerns here that people have talked about. And then all accessible structures again means, really good access for people with a variety of mobility. And then people have mentioned to some degree, and we've heard that some in some early conversations about public safety as well. Great. All right. Super helpful. Thank you. And this is really helping us understand what is important to you as we go forward with the design. All right. The next slide is one more question. So again, these are at least a few things, and you can put in other, you can say that, and we'll actually have a conversation about that. Like, what else do you want to know more about? And you've already begun to suggest some very specific things in chat. But it might be how much will it cost and who will pay for it? Probably on people's minds, given your concern about your property, as you said in the first slide that we did. You may want to be thinking about what steps your particular building can do now to keep it more flood resilient. You may want to understand more about the kind of reduction tools and choices, or you may want to be interested in kind of some of the aesthetic and landscaping pieces, which can be very important to the quality of the neighborhood. So I'd love to get a sense of where people are at. We'll see if we can get to 30 or so again and see what the results are. And then we'll give a little time for discussion as well. All right, we're almost there. All right, very good. All right, so interesting here. We'll let this see how this goes in the next. We'll watch real-time results here. So it looks like I think there's both a strong interest in how much it will cost and who will pay for it. Understandably, this is a combination of kind of public and private property, and so there's going to have to be, thoughtfulness about how that all fits together. I think the second question equally as strong as the detailed flood risk reduction tools and choices. So really, a lot of the effort going forward for this project is in fact to put in front of people the various alternatives and choices and details over how this would work, and have you all have influence and be able to weigh in on what's possible in terms of moving this forward to an actual design. So both those things make a lot of sense, and will be things we'll be working on as we go forward as the team and with all of you. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about what to expect going forward, but I wanted to see if there's any other questions or comments about the project or what we're doing. And there's a lot more to come and a lot more detail to get into as we begin to look at the actual details of design. But we want to kind of lay the general approach out tonight to give you a flavor as we get started, and hope this is just the beginning of an engagement with you all to work together to find a good solution. So any other questions, comments people want to make before we talk a little bit about some next steps and the like? Please just raise your hand, or if you can't find the raise hand function, you can just type your name in chat and I'll call on you. And we're adding some links in chat too, so. All right, well, why don't we go to the next slide? All right, so here's kind of what to expect going forward over the coming months. So the project is, it's got phases, and we want to note that, there's obviously some early data gathering and the like. That's kind of the technical part, but going forward, as this is developed, there's going to be engagement all the way along. So really, the phase one is evaluating options in a very broad sense. And then it's going to talk about how you would actually implement phasing, the feasibility assessment of what's actually possible. That's kind of what we'll call exploration. And then in the fall of this year, we'll hopefully get to designs and a range of things that are possible at even kind of the micro scale, I don't know, 300-400 yards, as well as how the whole district would look. And then also some recommended options as we begin to see what makes sense from a technical standpoint, from a feasibility standpoint, from your input and concerns and issues that you will raise as we work together. And then ultimately there'll be a benefit cost analysis to look at the kind of the cost piece, which is of course going to be important to everybody, especially in this time of uncertain federal resources. And then a final decision in the winter of 2025 to help us move forward from that. So again, input, exploration, design options, and choosing a design. Let me go to the next slide, because the intent is all along this design process, there will be periodic public meetings just like this. Sometimes we'll do them in person. Sometimes we'll actually do them online like this as we begin to show the work, ask for your input, and comment on very specific details. There will be at least a design charrette where we actually have our hands-on work with you in person somewhere in the neighborhood to really explore some of the different choices and work together to look at those different choices and what they mean and trade-offs and what people like and don't like and why. And then also, as we go along, there's any number of community events, especially over the summer. So we'll continue to try to bring this project forward and engage people on that and get people's concerns and issues. You're already there, and we often need to come to you. And so we will do that as well. So that's kind of our plan for engagement all along the way in this design process. Okay, so one question we want to ask, one last Slido question we do want to ask is how you prefer to be engaged. And so, you can choose all of these that apply. And if you just prefer in-person meetings and that's what you're going to do, then we want to know that. If you really prefer written information, then let us know that. And if there's something else on your mind, that's fine too. Just put in other. So we'd love to kind of get a sense of how you want to engage. So this is our last Slido question for tonight. And would appreciate your feedback so we know how to really to meet you where you're at. Oh, this might be the same about select one, so you may have to pick a priority here. Sorry about that, but we'll get a sense. And again, we're gonna try to do a variety of things, so this is not mutually exclusive, but we would just want to get a sense of your preferences. Okay, we'll give people just a little bit more time. We definitely want to get your input on this to know how you want to be engaged. All right, well, let's go ahead and show the results as a few more people have filled this out. All right, so this is interesting. So virtual meetings are preferred because you can do them from anywhere, often in the comfort of your own home or wherever it may be. So that's a very strong result. So we'll note that. When we do the design charrette, we'll probably need to do that in person, but there's some things we can do online too as we go forward. So very helpful to know. Written information, somewhat important. Small group interactions, a little bit. Community events, sure. But really our strong result here is virtual meetings. So that is very helpful feedback and pretty definitive, at least from the folks who filled this out. All right. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Rich and hand it over to you.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you everyone for your time this evening. This was a considerable amount of material that we went through, and we'll be posting the recording of this meeting and our presentation on the project webpage. Our goal here is to develop a higher level of design for flood resilience, building upon coastal resilience solutions for Charlestown phase 2, which included recommendations for resilient infrastructure, protecting the Navy Yard and the Little Mystic. We are looking at funding sources, whether they're through our own capital planning needs. So are there pieces that we could build in pieces as we're making improvements along the shoreline, or state or federal programs with like a grant readiness level of detail, including benefit cost analysis and decision making. But also, these meetings are important on just the awareness of these flood risks and what we can do now, and also what private property owners can do to protect, retrofit, and adapt their own properties, because we have no indication of when we'll be completing these projects. We know that the urgency is there, but the flood risks are getting greater. So we just encourage people to know your zone, where you're at risk, and to make your own investments. So the next step on our part, we're holding some office hours where our team will be out there to answer any additional questions. We'll have the presentation materials available. So we'll be hosting these office hours next week, May 5th from noon to 2 p.m. and then May 7th from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. at Building 114 in the Navy Yard on 16th Street. There's a public meeting room space in that building. And then also the Army Corps study. There's a webinar we're hosting jointly with the Army Corps on May 20th from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And the connection of the link here will put you towards the project meeting information. That'll be a virtual meeting as well. And then again, our project webpage has all of this information. We'll be updating it periodically. And happy to take more questions. I know there's some interest in the Outer Harbor Barrier that was studied by UMass Boston. It's not very economically feasible. It doesn't address that there are flood paths that enter through the town of Winthrop, the city of Revere, that there isn't a one-all fix. Storm surge barriers are effective for the storm, but not in the future, where we'll have higher tidal events and daytime flooding throughout the city. In our low-lying areas, Boston has 5,000 acres of landfill, and that's why we're looking at these district scale interventions. We're also looking for the most practical alternatives that do not require landfill or altering shorelines, like filling in coves or other things. In our experience with grant makers, that we have to follow, pretty concise regulatory recommendations. So, there's a practicality in our designs, because we want to move these projects quickly through permitting. And you'll see that in the recommendations that we'll be making. So thank you, everyone. And if there's any other questions, Patrick, out there that we might want to respond to.
Just one for engagement. I think Diane asked because summer is often a time when people are away, is there ability for people to send in comments, suggestions, whatever it is, in some fashion to the city in writing or otherwise, if they're not actually physically here?
Great. Our next slide. So has the contact information for our project lead, Xenia Aquaviva. So any questions you have, please feel free to send those over to her. Throughout this effort, we'll be engaged with you through the end of the year, and hope to see more engagement. We had a great turnout this evening. So again, I appreciate everyone's time.
Great. All right. Well, with that, thank you all very much. We really appreciate it. Got some initial feedback. We have a ways to go, and Ksenia is right there and very capable and engaged with you all. So certainly, if people want to send thoughts and ideas into her, please do. The virtual findings for meetings is strong for us, and that means even if you're not physically here in the summer and somewhere else, you can certainly call into a virtual meeting. So potentially, we'll take that very seriously as we go forward. All right. Thank you all. Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Ksenia. Thanks, Kiris and Brian for joining. And we appreciate it. And we will be in touch and be learning from all of you as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you all.